Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS. Thank you to CNC Technologies for sponsoring the special in-person interview that was recorded just prior to Heli Expo 2024. The expo was held in Anaheim, California. This recording took place in beautiful Beverly Hills, California, at the famous Lamar restaurant. CNC Technologies has assembled an impressive team of distinguished public safety aviators. During this two-part series, I got an opportunity to talk to their team in a panel-style conversation that covers a wide variety of important topics pertaining to public safety aviation. CNC Technologies is a company renowned for its deep relationships with major equipment vendors, aircraft OEMs, and completion and integration facilities worldwide. These connections enable CNC to develop customized solutions tailored to each client's unique mission profiles. They excel in creating long-range HD video and data transmission networks, encrypted mobile communications, tools for real-time surveillance, and robust systems designed for continuous operation in challenging environments. CNC Technologies brings decades of experience in deploying local, national, and global communication networks, providing custom aerial surveillance, data transmission, and counterterrorism solutions. With extensive expertise in supporting Urban Area Security Initiative UASI project funded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, CNC delivers tailored mission suite solutions for the world's most demanding operators, backed by unparalleled 24/7 service and support. Join us as we explore the cutting-edge world of CNC Technologies and their commitment to delivering your mission. Thank you to our special sponsor, CNC Technologies, as well as Collins, Goodrich, and Dallas Avionics.
Welcome to the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS. The Hangar Z podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Join your host, Jon Gray, Jeff Ratkovich, and Jack Shanley.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop down by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, threw the shotgun, threw something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
4 on the stop. You're in custody.
Good advising code 4 on the stop.
Hey, welcome to Hangar Z podcast. I'm your host, Jon Gray. Really weird being here with you guys. I mean, it's kind of come full circle. Hangar Z podcast started in, believe it or not, Hangar Z. I know it's hard to believe, but the conversation about the Hangar Z started in Hangar Y. And Hangar Y belongs to CNC Technologies. You guys were the first supporter of the podcast, and here we are 3.5 years later, sitting at a table about to go to HAI, having some nice little cocktails, and going to talk about some interesting topics. First of all, thank you, CNC and Alex, for supporting the podcast. Really cool that you guys stepped up. I think it is what makes you guys industry leaders when it comes to a lot of this stuff. You don't kind of rest on the traditional stuff. So thank you guys for being here, and thanks for your support. We're going to kind of do a panel-style conversation today. We've done one panel before. It was the leadership panel, and Eric, you were a part of that. So it's kind of in the likeness of the leadership panel. We're going to talk about leadership, technology, and career development. So CNC has done a really good job of putting together a unique panel of experts from the industry to work and better the industry as a whole. So excited to dig into that. We're in a really cool location today. We've never done an on-location style interview. This is the first one of those. Picked a really cool spot for this. It's called Lamar Restaurant and Bar. It's in Beverly Hills, which I'm surprised they let me in Beverly Hills, to be honest. I'm from the mountains and I wear blue jeans. But here we are. We made it in. Just a unique conversation that we're having today. So thank you guys for joining us. As with every episode of the Hangar Z podcast, we got to start with drink of the day. Being that we're in a bar and drink of the day is here, I think it's pretty awesome and well suited to get going. I'm drinking a whiskey. So Easy Rider was kind enough to let us drink some of their whiskey today. Easy Rider comes out of Oregon, and I'm drinking it neat. So that's my drink of the day. There's going to be lots of drinks of the day, I know, as we progress through HAI and through this podcast. But thank you, Easy Rider, and thank you, Lamar, for being here to allow us to record from your facility. So for you, what is your drink of the day?
My drink of the day is rum and Coke, real Coke, not that diet stuff, and clear rum. Yeah, that's
okay.
Fine.
Is there a brand of rum you prefer?
I prefer Plantation, but I will drink whatever's put in front of me. And so thank you for that one.
Okay.
So mine is a double Woodford on the rocks.
Okay. Nice.
And Woodford on the rocks for me as well.
Okay.
That's the go-to.
That's why you guys are sitting next to each other.
Yeah, I just worked out that way. Yes.
And I hear you've got a special drink of the day.
I do. I'm usually a bourbon guy, but I do have a special drink coming.
The bar, they call it an interactive bar, as best I can describe it. And our bartender's making up 2 really interesting interactive drinks for drink of the day. And as he gets over here, I'll kind of let him explain what he's doing.
All right. Thanks you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.
I appreciate you guys being here.
I will say real quick, this is the first time we had a bartender on the podcast. That's awesome.
I like it. First for everything, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys again. So we have here, we're going to do the old fashioned first. And what we have is a sugar infused helium cloud. On our cocktail menu, we have interactive theatrical cocktails. It's kind of like a little show and we get the guests involved. So for the first one, we're going to do sugar infused helium clouds. It's edible. It floats. Like I said, it's interactive. So I'll have him kind of cut the cloud and we'll catch the clouds. And then the next drink we have is one of our signature cocktails. It's a spa martini, gin-based, muddled cucumbers, basil, lemon juice, Saint Germain, simple syrup. And that one gets an edible smoke bubble. We play a little wishing game with that.
That's awesome. I've never heard of such a thing, but I like it.
Yeah, it's great. Chef Marcos, Chef Lewis, and Nick and I, we just came up with an idea that we wanted people to have an experience, not just, great cocktails and great cuisine, because you can get that anywhere in LA.
Can you just plug the restaurant real quick? I gave a real brief intro and about the restaurant, but can you talk about the origins and whatnot?
Yeah, so Chef Marcos and Chef Lewis have been a team for about 8 years now, and they had a really successful food truck. They were on an episode for Food Network for their food truck, and then Marcos was approached for season 3 of Below Deck. I was considered one of the most talented chefs and had the best ratings and so forth. And after that, they had the downtown in the Koreatown location, and then we closed that down, and now we're here in Beverly Hills, flourishing more than ever. So we're really, really grateful for that.
That's cool. Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, no worries. All right, let's get this interaction going then. Here we go. Ready? As high as you can, because the more room, the better. Take a breath of it.
This is the most unique drink of the day we've ever had. I don't know if we could ever top this. I'll be honest.
It's like a wishing game. Okay, so you need to think of a wish. You can't tell any of the boys at the table. You already know it won't come true. All right, on 3, pop the ball, whatever you want. 1, 2. Yeah, so these are interactive theatrical cocktails for the morning.
Very cool.
Hey, appreciate you, boys.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers. So, what do you guys think? What's your initial response to theatrical cocktails?
It's unconventional, but because it involves alcohol, we'll allow it.
Very good.
Right on. All right. So for our last hot seat, it's actually a hot seat. It's still drink of the day. Eric Widener. Eric, you've been on the podcast a couple times. People that listen talk about you a lot in a good way. I see the giggles over here, but no, honestly, you're the best sergeant I ever worked for, and the support of the podcast that you offered me has been huge. So thank you for that. One thing I remember working for you is you're really good at telling stories and you're really good with your accents. So being that you're really good with your accents, I want you to thank our bartender for the wonderful theatrical drinks that he provided for us. So if you could just introduce our bartender for us and then talk about your drink of the day, that'd be awesome.
Bartender today, Andres. And we want to all thank him.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
And I guess that was very cool. And I think none of us knew what to expect, but it was cool. Absolutely.
What's your drink of the day?
This is a Woodford on the Rocks.
Okay. That your go-to whiskey?
Yeah, usually.
Okay. Well, love it. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks again for your guys' support of the Hangar Z podcast and what you guys are doing with the industry. It's awesome. The next segment of the Hangar Z podcast, I'm going to abbreviate a little bit. Usually we do 3 hot seat questions. It's just kind of an icebreaker, some randomness that comes out of that. It's always fun. So we'll just kind of work our way, starting with you and ending with Eric again. Sorry, Eric, at the end. The question is, what's the most outdated piece of technology you have in your house that you actually use? We'll start with you there.
That's a good one. I would say a 35 millimeter camera.
Wow. That's one of those things. I don't even know if you took a photo with that camera. Where do you get it developed?
You can still get them developed. Yeah, sure. Sure you can.
I do like that you're still old school. Do you have a development lab in your house?
As a child, I had a dark room. And
wait,
yeah.
we're talking about photography, right?
Yeah. Oh no. yeah. No, not now. No.
Okay.
No,
All right. Ed?
It's probably our piano. That's all I can think of because it is old itself.
Yeah.
I don't know what other old technology. I did change the print the typewriter ribbon in my mother-in-law's typewriter a week ago that she actually uses. And don't make me explain how I know how to do it, but I had the same typewriter, but I don't still have it.
I didn't know they made that still. That's actually really interesting. I remember as a kid hearing typewriters, and that was like the sound of movement and production. Now I'm like, what the hell is that noise? That's funny for you.
Well, it's a tough one. We just moved in. My wife and I just moved into a place here about 6 months ago, and great house and everything, but it has a central vac in it, and I was never familiar with a central vac system ever. And I guess they still exist. This house is a better part of a decade and a half old, but I thought that was a thing of the past, and somehow it's there, but it works great, but it's just not up to speed with for making noise. Make noise. So, but anyhow, that's all I can come up with is the central vac system.
Okay.
Everything else is still relevant.
All right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Technology has advanced so quickly. I feel like the house is the one place where some of the remnants of old technology might exist. But Shannon, for you?
I think it would be a sledgehammer and a splitting wedge.
All right.
We live in Maryland. It gets cold in the wintertime, and we have a wood stove in our house because we live fairly off the grid. And if we lose power, we're going to need to heat the house. And I still cut it with a chainsaw. And then about 6 months later, I split it individually into wedges.
All right. Yeah, I was saying, I think the typewriter initially was going to be the winner. Eric, there's a little bit of pressure on you now. Larry, for you, what's your most outdated piece of technology in the house?
I would have to say the deadbolt on the screen door, on the security screen door at the front door. I still have to have a key to open it. And everything else is, I can open with the phone or what have you, but I still need a key for that one.
Yeah.
If I lose the key, I have to go into the electrical box to get the spare key.
Thinking the keys, that's becoming a pretty old piece of technology by itself. Like you said, most vehicles, a lot of things don't require a key anymore. So maybe the key and the axe might be the winning scenario here. So we're going to put a little pressure on Eric. But Eric, I feel like just knowing you,
closer.
It's our doorbell. We just have a regular doorbell.
Okay.
No ring. When we moved into the house, the way that it was configured, there was no opportunity to change it out. So when somebody pushes the button by the front gate, it just says it's a ding dong. It seems weird, but it's
appropriate.
Yeah.
Okay.
You instantly kind of know that somebody's out there.
Well, that's Drink of the Day and the hot seat. Thank you guys for playing along. I'd like to just kind of transition and have you guys introduce yourselves, talk about, what agency you worked for and what you're doing with CNC currently. And Eric, we'll start with you since we're on you now.
Eric Widener, previously with Ontario Police Department in Southern California for 30 years, the last 15 of that in the air unit and the last 6 of that running the air unit. And then I started CNC Technologies with Alex DeFrida and Ron Magassi, and it's been a great ride.
Yeah, for anybody that listens to the podcast knows that I speak highly of you. You were the unit supervisor when I went to aviation. So first of all, thank you for selecting me to go via aviation. It changed my whole career in life.
It was a long shot.
Yeah, I mean,
but every once in a while they pay off. So,
but it's been really cool to see your career progress and then transition to CNC. And I remember some of the other conversations about your vision for CNC, and to see it come to fruition has been absolutely amazing. You guys have become an industry staple. It's been really cool to sit back and kind of watch this thing develop. And again, to be sitting here with a panel of you guys, with expertise and knowledge from the industry from across the country, it's really cool.
No, and I think that's why this has been a great relationship, because I think what you're doing with the podcast is new, it's evolutionary, and I think it's a great partnership with what we're doing. They go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
Right on.
Yeah, the feeling's mutual.
Yeah, thank you.
Larry O'Brien, and the program manager here at CNC, but my background is from 21 years with the California Highway Patrol. Ultimately, the last 13 years being in the aviation side. I started down in Southern California as a flight officer paramedic on our aircraft down in Apple Valley, and then did that for a little over 5.5 years or so, and then transitioned to Sacramento as the chief flight officer for the department, overseeing training, flight officer training, external load training, annual check rides for about 76 flight officers throughout the department, both fixed wing and rotorcraft.
Talk about an interesting agency. You guys, your mission profile is so vast, and the things that you're responsible for is pretty unique. So at some point we'll have to circle back and talk about your experience in some of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Shannon Mack, I'm a retired sergeant from the Anne Arundel County Police Department, and Anne Arundel County is situated just south of Baltimore City and just about 30 miles east of D.C. And I've been in the unit started in the unit in 1990, retired 2 years ago with 35 and a half years. I don't want the 6 months to go in vain, but I was flying on 9/11 during the events of 9/11 in DC and the Beltway sniper incident. So I've been assigned to aviation since 1991.
So how many years total in aviation before you retired?
33 years in aviation.
Wow.
I was decentralized from 91 to 99 and then went full time in 99.
That's cool.
Brian Peterson, and quality assurance manager here at CNC, and I come from a 29-year law enforcement career, very fortunate with the Nebraska State Patrol. I did about 20 years with the aviation unit itself, in the last 4 years leading the unit as unit manager. I was presented with the same challenges that any state police or law enforcement agency is presented with, but it was a rewarding endeavor, and one that I learned a lot from and was very appreciative of, and there's still a bunch of good folks there in the unit that I can be proud of, and I couldn't ask for a better career. But 29 years in total.
Yeah.
So that was a good thing.
Honestly, you're the first person from Nebraska that I've had in the podcast. That's super unique. I'll talk about operating in cold temperatures. What was your coldest operating temperature that you recall in your time there?
Well, they all run together. And so we had one particular mission where we rescued a bunch of duck hunters off of a river where a cold front came in, and it was nearing a minus 45 wind chill, and straight up minus 22 and minus 25. Serious operations because we're over water, and it's just a cold state, and hence why I now live in the state of Missouri. So
last year, the community I live in Southern California at about 6,000 feet. So we get snow. We got a big storm that came through, dropped about 10 feet of snow, and it canceled my trip to HAI. And I remember thinking after that snowstorm, I was tired of the snow. That my thought was, I want to move to a state where if I put a snowblower in the back of my truck and drive across the country, first place that says, what is that thing in the back of your truck? That's where I want to live.
That's where you're landing.
So I feel like that applies to you, right?
Yep, that's it. And I took my snowblower to our current residence at Lake Ozark, Missouri, and so I have not had to use it. So people ask why I brought it, and it's a good luck charm.
What is that thing?
So, that's just right.
Yeah, right on. Ed
Van Winkle. I'm the Vice President of Sales and OEM Projects for CNC. I've been with the company at this show 7 years. Before that, I worked at Airbus Helicopters for almost 10 years. As the law enforcement sales manager. I had the pleasure of selling Sergeant Widener a helicopter that ended up with extended seat rails and some other things.
I remember those.
And so it was a great job change going from selling aircraft to then selling complete mission solutions. And now I really don't care what aircraft anybody buys. They can buy a Bell or an MD or a Eurocopter or a Leonardo or whatever brand airplane. Before that, I was a police officer with the city of Gainesville in north central Florida. Retired as a captain, and I was a pilot and the unit commander for our joint aviation unit with the Alachua County Sheriff's Office.
So I think everybody in public safety aviation knows who Ed Van Winkle is. If you don't know who Ed is, you've probably lived under a rock for a while. Our friend and co-host Brian Smith has nothing but the kindest words to say about you and the impact you had, in your agency and on public safety aviation as a whole. Talks about your leadership styles and the impact it had on him. Kudos to you for all that, because that's not by accident,
Well, and I know this is out of order, and you may cover this topic, and we can talk about it later, but, part of being successful in running a unit is finding the right people and passing it on to the next group of folks who are going to move up, because not only did I hired Brian for his first law enforcement pilot job, but I was on the board of directors of ALEA, now APSA, when we picked him to be the safety program manager, which he was for 10 years.
Yeah.
And he was amazing at that job.
Yeah.
Very, very skilled and very successful. So, we have to look out for the folks that are coming up behind us, because for anyone who's a boss, you need to leave the unit better than you started it. And there has to be a progression plan, because you can't just find a pilot and plug him in 3 months. It's a long process. So
I think we talk about that a lot in the podcast. We want to leave it better than we found it. And you definitely did that. And talking about Brian, I feel like through the 10 years that he spent as the safety director at APSA, you try and think about how many lives he potentially saved. It's hard to fathom, that program he's built, the safety program there, is absolutely amazing. That man has had a lot of impact in a positive way in our industry, and that directly comes from you and all the legacies that you left behind. So really cool.
Mark Costa, Director of Training, came from the Massachusetts State Police, worked there for 26 years, last 16 in the aviation unit, went to college for aviation, came a trooper, thought the aviation is behind me, and then got probably like you applied, like all of us, applied for an opening in the aviation unit, got in there and said, oh my God, I'm in a helicopter. What is this thing? 'Cause I was a fixed wing guy, rookie TFO to chief TFO to rookie pilot to chief pilot and executive officer, and then hit the road. You're out. You both said just recently, I'll leave it better than you found it. I have another take on that, and then is expect it to be left by the next guy better than you gave it to him. Meaning, don't take offense when somebody comes along and then does something better than you did it. You should be proud of that.
Yeah.
That's to me. I always hear that. Let's leave it better than we got it, but no, let's expect the guy behind us to make it even better than we did. I reach back to my guys in Massachusetts and I hear the training officer now is doing it better than I did it. And that doesn't hurt my feelings at all. It makes me feel good.
Yeah.
So.
No, I feel like as a parent, that's kind of our goal, right?
Yeah.
You want your kids to do better than you did. And I think oftentimes, the lessons you learned having kids directly plays into people's ability to lead folks effectively. And it speaks to what you're saying with that, So I love that. And I actually don't know that I've heard it said that way, but I 100% agree with you. I love the topic of leadership because it affects our industry across the board. I had the benefit of having a great leader when I started in aviation with Eric, and I just kind of expected that every unit had somebody like Eric to lead the program. But through the course of my experience in aviation and then running the podcast, you realize a lot of people have issues with leadership within their agency, within their aviation unit. The difficulty lies in the kind of how we set people up to become leaders. A lot of times you take a test on Friday, and by Monday, you're tapped on the shoulder and said, congratulations, you're now a leader. And the development that should go into play doesn't take place for a whole host of reasons. So I'd like to get into that with you guys as we go, but just to note that I do think there's a shortcoming there when it comes to our industry with leadership, because there is a lack of leadership development, as it goes to promotions and stuff. With that, I guess it's a kind of a good time to kind of segue into the topic of leadership. Our industry is dealing with recruitment, retention issues across the board. Whether you're in aviation, patrol, doesn't matter what agency you work for. I think every agency is struggling to get people for a whole host of reasons. Some of which is politics. Some of it is, legislation that's being passed. If you're in California, you're seeing that. So the first question I'll ask, and Mark, I'll start with you, and we'll just kind of go down the board. So when it comes to retention, obviously we're not bringing folks to aviation unless there's enough folks to fill the seats in patrol, right? But once they get to patrol, or once they get to aviation from patrol, there's a lot of options today. As a helicopter pilot with experience, you can go to the airlines. There's a whole host of job availability to leave. People say folks don't leave their bad pay, they leave a bad boss.
That's right.
So what's your thought on some of that?
Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at cnctechnologies.com.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. We talked earlier about, I always ask, what's your favorite leadership book? And mine was Turn the Ship Around. And then there's the other one that's not quite leadership, but Drift into Failure, which is an amazing book on how we have to be careful we don't normalize deviancy. What I think is fascinating about it is what we all struggle with the same situation, don't we? We get a brand new TFO. We put a fair amount of energy into them. We make them good TFOs. We hope they make themselves great TFOs. And then many departments then transition that great TFO into a rookie pilot. My agency does pretty much exactly that. And then that leadership, in my opinion, is where that's where it becomes the most important thing, where you need to take, because you talked about morale and how do we keep our people. Well, every agency struggles with this. Where do we get our TFOs from, and where do we get our pilots from, and do we transition pilot from the TFO side? So you have this phenomenal TFO who now becomes a rookie pilot. I finished up as a lieutenant, and I would always tell them, this is going to be tough for you because you were a great TFO. You're going to need to draw the imaginary curtain. And when that new rookie TFO, who's completed his training, is struggling, your job is not to help him. And that's hard to do. That's kind of that tough love leadership where you've got to let that TFO struggle, because your job is to fly the airframe. not fly into a tower, not fly, control flight into terrain, but make us all come home safely. We all have a stake in staying alive. So one of the greatest things was you met Greg Spooner, Greg. He had come to me and said, boy, I didn't think it was like you said it, but it's exactly like you say it. And then the other part for me for leadership is you got to hold the line. And I know that sounds weird because that becomes a very conservative point of view where nothing changes. Larry has this great line from about 200 years of tradition. What is it, Larry? Unaffected by progress. Yeah. Yes. And we all dealt with that as cops, right? No one wants to change anything. But many times you have to hold the line because they're trying to lower the standard all the time, always lower the standard. I think as a leader, you don't let that happen. I think for safety and for performance, you don't let it be watered down.
Yeah. So it's funny. I feel like two things that cops hate is change and something different. Yeah, that's right.
That's nailed it.
We're always looking for innovative ways to make our industry better, but a lot of times you find resistance when it comes to implementing those processes. So it's interesting.
I just think that good leadership is the balance of that.
Yeah,
you nailed it.
Yep, absolutely. So for you, again, you've got a vast experience and legacy when it comes to leadership. Kind of what's your thought when it comes to the retention of folks within your agency?
So, one of the biggest challenges that law enforcement is facing in general is retention of people. It's not just aviation folks, it's cops in general, because generations are changing, how they view their work is different. And what I'm seeing for a lot of agencies, it's a combination of professional development, whether it's more pay for higher ratings, pay in general. Some agencies have decided, well, we can't keep sworn folks, so we're going to hire non-sworn pilots. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong answer, because if you can't get them from within, it might make sense professionally to go outside and get someone who's already a professional aviator. That's one thing that law enforcement agencies completely miss out on, because all of us have done a wide range of jobs as cops. And before we were in aviation, even if I didn't work as a canine officer, I know what canine officers did. And I use them as a tool. But aviation's a whole other thing, because it's a profession within a profession. And even our very smart bosses don't really get that. They don't understand that you can't just, when you have requirements for people to work the road for a certain period of time, whether it's 2 years or 5 years, or it depends upon the agency, you can't just produce a pilot. And you get people who decide, hey, we got 2 guys retiring this year. Well, guess what? It can take 2 years to get somebody to the point where you can cut them loose to fly a helicopter, depending upon what your training model is for how they get ratings, or do they have to have at least a private fixed wing rating before they start. So there's a lot of different starting points for different agencies. Some of them will say, hey, that guy was an Army Black Hawk pilot, and we're going to snatch him over to aviation. He might have been with the agency for 6 months. But back to your question, I think paying people what you need to pay them to keep them, because, a lot of agencies give you incentive pay, but others don't. There's some agencies that you get paid the same as an officer or a deputy or a trooper. And if you really want to fly, once you get your time, now you're trying to find the next best job. And in Florida, we have folks that will move from agency to agency because they can stay in the state retirement system. So they can move from one sheriff's office to another. And many have, and it's not a gig on them, is that they're looking for a better job. And so I think as leaders, we have to educate our bosses so they understand what we're up against, because I don't think a lot of them get it. They don't get how much work goes into it. But again, the problem is, as soon as we get our boss, whether it's a captain or an assistant chief or whatever, educated, they retire or switch jobs because they have to rotate every 3 or 4 years. And all of a sudden we're starting again. Even if we're the constant force in our unit, the bosses above us have changed. And so we're at some level, we're constantly re-educating people. And in my role as a sales guy, that happens too, where you've got someone to the point where they're ready to do something. And then all of a sudden leadership changes and you went from the 5-yard line back to the 50.
Yeah.
And you're trying to make progress. So I think when it comes to getting agencies and moving them ahead, I think it's a combination of professional development and funding and educating our bosses on how our units work.
Yeah, I think what you bring up is being willing to fight for your folks. Being willing to go downtown and say, I value my team and what we're doing, and I think it's valuable for these reasons. Because of that, we need these things. If you're not willing to go and fight for your folks downtown, then things are going to start going backwards, in my opinion. And I keep reverting back to Eric. Eric did a really good job of that at our agency. He was downtown all the time advocating for our needs, and it wasn't even always on the sworn side. You know, we had a really great Ms. Zena. We all know and love Ms. Zena in Ontario. She literally, if she didn't pen a note to our chest when we went home each day to tell us how to get home, we probably wouldn't get home. She held us together, but he advocated for her pay raise and position title change so that she could stay with us, which benefited the unit as a whole. And the reason I bring that up is just because it goes to making sure that you're advocating for the folks for the things they need. Being willing to go and fight for those things when others aren't is a big deal. And like you said, and I love what you said about to go back and do it again, because leadership changes all the time. I feel like in Southern California, at least, or in California, the position of chief rotates every 2 or 3 years because of retirements. So every time you get a new chief, now you've got a whole nother political issue to deal with. So that first battle you won may not be the end of the war as far as it goes with PR, you know? So I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I'm just going to jump to you, Eric, real quick to touch and elaborate on like the willingness and ability to go and fight for your folks downtown and what that looked like for you.
It's like any business where you create a brand, you create a culture, and that in part speaks to what I was talking about, where you're re-educating people. So the way that you mitigate some of that is by creating a brand or a culture that everybody begins to understand. I had a boss of mine when I was coming up told me, if you say something enough and it's true, people will just start accepting it, right? I mean, even if it's not sometimes. So what you want to do is reiterate things over and over and over again. And that requires a lot of time and energy, but that's what it takes. So you get to the place where people understand what your mission is, what the culture is, what your capabilities are. And even when somebody new comes into the room, it's not a huge shakeup because everybody that's around them says, oh, listen, we'll explain it to you. This is how this works. This is what these guys get. This is what they do. And that person very quickly falls into line because you've already done the legwork of being there enough times to explain what you do, foster relationships, and create this willingness to work with whomever needs help so that it transcends a lot of the traditional pitfalls and barriers that come up. And it also, you talk about fighting for your people, but it's all part of one. It's all part of it. And I had another really intelligent guy that I worked for that used to tell me, we shouldn't do things because that's always the way we've done it.
Wait, you didn't come up with that?
I think
So I will say I've given you credit for that for a long time. So you just fell on the sword.
You gave me credit for the first time we do it shouldn't be the first time.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
But the other one was we don't do things because that's the way we've always done it. And that was a very common law enforcement mindset. Because as you came on to law enforcement, I came on in the late 80s. And it was a very traditional profession. And that was coveted. And so you didn't mess with that. You kind of fell in line and you went and did what everybody did before you. This is, I think, critical more now than ever before because the workforce that we're asking to come and take up this cause and choose this profession, I think more so than ever, is motivated by different things that I was motivated by. And it's about feeling that they're valued. And so I think that, like I said, it goes full circle, but it's all part of the same thing. So people have to understand and realize every single day that what they're doing means something, that they're valued, they're appreciated, and that what they're doing is part of a bigger cause, and it's part of a bigger whole. It's valuable and it's worthy.
One thing I saw from the outside working with Eric when I worked at Airbus, because I worked with units all over the country from, what I would refer to as, East Podunk PD, which are small agencies trying, with a couple aircraft, but like they're surplus or they're trying to get their first certificated ship or whatever it is, to the big units like Mass State Police, Texas TPS, you can name them. But one thing I found working with Eric was that he and his agency, they understood what aviation did because it was marketed. And it wasn't just to the police department. It was to other city departments. And so when you go and meet with other folks, and this talks to leadership of how to bring your unit up, because it's making your unit useful to everybody. So you can develop your people, but if you're not getting the word out about what you do, then your unit is not going to continue to get the funding to do all the stuff they want to do. And literally, after a while, y'all got into a cadence that you're still in that, okay, it's been 6 or 7 years since we bought an aircraft. Now we need to replace this one. And boom, they've been saving up for it just like they save up for patrol cars. I mean, it's part of a budget. It's not a surprise. They don't say, well, we just bought you a helicopter. Well, yeah, it was 6, 7 years ago, but it's part of their plan. Mm-hmm. And when you become part of the agency's plan because of how you pitch your work and how you report what you do, and that kind of comes back to a lot of what we do at CNC. With CNC Live, now everybody can see what you do. They get what you do. Otherwise, it's just what you put in a report, and it can be true or not true, or it can be inflated, or they'll say, well, they weren't responsible for that many arrests. But when they're watching the arrests happen, then it can't be refuted.
Yep.
And the units that are the most successful, another one that's a great example is Ohio State Highway Patrol. Justin Cromer, their captain, if you read their annual report, you're like, wow, look at what these guys have done in a month.
And they have embedded videos in their report. Essentially, you can click on it and review the videos right there in the WhatsApp.
And so they're really promoting, and what ends up happening, what we find, we get as the vendor that's providing equipment or support is now all of a sudden many new replacements become part of the budget because the whole agency realizes we can't do without them. And so when you become invaluable, then it helps move helps move your people up within your unit, but it helps keeping the unit going because they can't do without you. They'll cut something else before they cut aviation.
Yeah.
And you want to be the boss that makes that happen.
Right.
And Eric did that at Ontario.
It's a timely point given what LAPD just went through with their audit. Being able to prove the return on the investment that the city's making into your program is critical. And how you do that is really important. Touch on the embedded vehicle or embedded video portion. We just talked to an agency that does that. And the first time I heard that, I was like, wow, that's genius. I hadn't even considered that. But, we submitted a weekly activity report and a monthly activity report. But the fact now that you can embed video and like you talk about with the downlink, all these decision makers seeing not just in the police department, but downtown City Hall, the emergency operations center, they're seeing live downlink broadcasts from your unit of things that are happening in the city, whether it's police related, fire related, natural disaster related. They can look at the aviation program and be like, they're responsible for providing this. So there's a direct, tangible thing they can see that's benefiting the city as a result of the investment they made in your program.
When I was already here at CNC, when I saw Ohio State Patrol's monthly report that Keith Haney sent me, and I was blown away by it. And I thought we had a pretty good formula, but it's proof that, like I said, that just because you're doing something a certain way doesn't mean that it's the way you should be doing it. Because if I was still working in my capacity at Ontario, I would have immediately changed it and reformatted it to do what Ohio's doing, or do what Ohio's doing and maybe something else. So there's always room for new ideas, and there's always people out there, and it's just a matter of finding out who's doing it, where they're doing it, and how they're doing it.
That's been one of the neat parts with doing the podcast is hearing those ideas, and the folks that are hearing those ideas while listening to the podcast, then implementing them. So, this community is really cool. We're always wanting to help the agency next door or the folks that we interact with at these different conferences. But now I feel like, just by hearing you guys talk about some of this stuff, somebody in an agency who wouldn't have been able to attend this convention is hearing that and affecting positive change. So I just think it's really cool. The way we consume information today is really neat.
Thank you to our sponsor, Collins Aerospace Goodrich. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Collins Aerospace's Goodrich hoists stay ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety.
Going back to something you touched on, and I think it's important to talk about it, is developing relationships outside of the police department that are critical to the aviation unit. And I remember talking to you about some of these events, HAI, ABSCON. You go, and every vendor you talk to has some sort of swag available for you to take. And after you've been to 2 or 3 of these things, you probably don't need any more swag. You've had your fill of all this stuff, and your kids have had their fill of all this stuff. But Eric, one thing you did that I thought was really cool when it comes to the development of those relationships is picking up that swag and taking it to the person in accounting. Believe it or not, the person in accounting is as much part of our mission success as anybody else. So by having frequent interactions with them, taking them stuff to know that, one, they're a part of the team and they're part of the mission, they're vested in the program now. I always thought that was really smart. Can you talk about your decision to do that and kind of how you explain to them how they were a part of the team?
Yeah, one of the things that always frustrated me was when you were trying to get something done and you would run into hurdles or obstacles, and the person responsible for removing that hurdle or obstacle had maybe never even heard their name, and you had no idea where they worked. I mean, they weren't part of the police department. They were in a city hall somewhere. And I thought, I don't know that there's any other business that we would try to operate efficiently and yet have no clue who had this much control over this aspect of what we were trying to get done. I thought, I need to get to know these people. And you brought up an HAI because we're on the verge of it, or we're in the middle of it. This is a great example, but I would go grab swag, and specifically if I could find calendars, I would take calendars. That was the key piece of swag I would take. And I would take calendars down to everybody I could find in accounting, accounts payable, purchasing, you name it. As many as I had, I would take them down, I would hand them out, and I would introduce myself to people and get to know them. The idea with the calendars was not only would they remember that contact with me, because it was so rare that somebody would actually take for a while, like accounts payable and purchasing was in the basement of the city hall. So these people literally never they didn't even see the light of day during their workday.
Like, do this in the sun?
Yeah. For somebody to actually seek them out was more than unusual. But I would go down and give them a calendar and introduce myself. And for 12 months, they would put that calendar up, and every single month it may not be our helicopter, but it's a new helicopter. And so you're constantly embedding that thought in their brain. When there was opportunities for us to get our helicopter in a calendar, that was a home run, because I would get as many of those as I could get, and I would take them down. When the month came, I would call people and remind them that we were going to be up, on that month. Or people would start calling me and saying, "Hey, we didn't realize that you guys were going to be, in this calendar." This sounds silly, but they make a huge impact.
Yeah.
Because when you go make contact with somebody that nobody's ever taken the time to go meet face to face, it creates an impression and a bond that you can't buy. So when you have a problem and you pick up the phone and call that person, you're not calling them for the first time. You're not introducing yourself over the phone. It's not always practical depending on the city or the size of your organization, but it's almost never impossible. You can reach out to a certain number of people, and even if it's not everybody.
The next step beyond that, which was really cool, was then inviting that particular department from the city up to the hangar for like an open house barbecue. Because then not only do they see helicopters on an everyday basis and know who you are, your name's not foreign to them, they're now coming up to the unit and seeing the operation, even going for a flight. Now they've bought into the program. And when you call and need something, it's not like, oh, I don't know who this person is and I don't know what their mission is. They have this request that seems like an ungodly amount of money. Do I want to approve this? No, you've already shown them the value that you've created, and these relationships have been established. So I've always thought that was a genius move, and I really encourage anybody who's not doing something similar to adopt that type of fighting for your people mentality. And it sounds silly to say fighting for people in that sense, but really that's what you're doing when you're going downtown to talk and build relationships with these folks. You're developing a relationship that's fighting for your people, and I love that.
Yeah, it's a lot of times it's not. I made a lot of trips downtown that I didn't want to make.
Yeah,
when we would find out that the helicopter we were purchasing was $500,000 more than we thought it was going to be. That's a trip that you don't want to make to the finance director's office, but you have to go down there, and And I remember doing it once specifically for that purpose. And in my mind, I was like, I'm walking out of here and we're not getting a helicopter. They're literally going to tell me you're out of luck. And it was literally, he calls in a lady with a gigantic book and says, we're $500,000 over budget. Is that going to be a problem? And she flips this book open and says, no, we're good. It's in the account. Is there anything else? And I was like, no, that was it. Okay, we're all set. You know, in my mind, I walked out of there kind of dumbfounded, but it was a tribute to that, to the legwork that had been put in prior to that. And it goes back to including those people in your success. They're not just accounts payable people. They're not just purchasing people. Without those people, the helicopters don't leave the ground.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me to think about how many people are involved in the operational success of everything we do. It's not the two people sitting in the cockpit. It's a list that goes far beyond that, down to what you're saying, you know? And I think it's important for us to recognize that, even down to the tower, the folks that have no relationship with our operation at all, down to the R&D, the people developing this stuff. You know, it's really cool to see all the activity that surrounds all this stuff. But for you guys, Nebraska, what things did you implement to kind of create that?
Well, I tell you what, you know, after all that's been said, it's difficult to build on it in some ways, but I think specifically to Nebraska, I always tried to operate with, and I said this before in the introductions, that, you know, I was very fortunate to be in the position that I was because I believe that I implemented some things, and it goes back to Mark's point about succession. People say, you know, you did it well, it's going to be hard to replace you. And my response was always, it's not going to be hard to replace me. Somebody's going to do it better, and I'm going to be proud of it, you know, because that's what you set them up for. You set them up for success. There's no winning here out of the deal. But when it comes down to that, with all the things that come across, it's the operating in the vacuum, and it's also that you don't know what you don't know, you know, those adages. And so I did my best to pick up where it was left off, to educate our administration. With that, it was able to purchase a new aircraft. But it wasn't just at that acquisition level, it was the operational level, so that we got to the point when you talk about everybody that supports your roles, that you would walk into state headquarters and they'd say, hey, you had a big weekend this weekend, or you had a great successful story to talk about, because they knew, because it filtered through before it even hit the official press release, was saving a 3-year-old missing kid, or was, you know, apprehending somebody that in a big crime that we went out and were deeply, you know, involved with. And so one of the things that I took upon myself was right at the very get-go was I took my boss and I took him down to Bell. And this is just because we operate Bell products. And I got him down to Bell, and I got him out to the practice area, and I had an instructor take him out and do a bunch of autos and do a bunch of stuff, and came back wide-eyed and figure out what's going on here. This is what you got to do, because, you know, we go down there and spend X amount of dollars every training cycle. A lot of those folks, because of attrition, don't pass that forward. And a lot of those folks, because of the constant change that always evolves, the only constant is change in law enforcement, don't have a true feeling for that. And so you have to get them involved with that and understand that, because when you go to spend dollars and you go to, you know, for unforeseen or the foreseen of a budget, nobody really blinks an eye if you present it right and you take the time to get it in the system to actually present it to them. It's before when they didn't realize that aviation did a whole lot, or it's before when they thought that aviation wasn't as deeply involved as they were, supporting, in our case, because Omaha and Lincoln metros are really close together, the two largest cities, we were deeply involved in supporting the FBI. We were deeply involved with supporting the DEA. And it became not nice to have, it became a need to have, to do their missions and for us to do our mission. And so that was the easy part of it, is just to educate people. You talk about a little bit with, you know, the toughness at the beginning with recruiting. One of the challenges that we faced biggest was the philosophy that when you have a trooper and you bring them to a specialty unit, whether it be K-9 or SWAT or aviation, they do that job and they move on because they're going to do a promotion. You know, they want to become a sergeant, they want to become a lieutenant, they want to keep progressing. They bounce around, they go to investigative services. What was not reinforced, and I really worked to do this, was that aviation is the caveat. It really is. And I'm not taking anything away from any other discipline that's out there, whether it be SWAT or K-9 or investigations. But I always presented to my folks, my administration, that it's a 5-year cycle. You go from 0 to fully MVG qualified helicopter pilot. It's a 5-year deal. And it could be shorter than that, yes, but let's also face it, in law enforcement, it's one of the few vocations of aviation that somebody gets in the front seat of a 407 or a H125 with relatively low hours, because it's unheard of anywhere else unless you're going to go fly tours. And so the importance that I try to impress upon leadership is that you're taking people, and you have to have that background and that training as TFOs. You have to have that background of sitting in the left seat for that experience before they get into the right seat, because it's a big deal with law enforcement aviation operations.
Yeah,
and they're faced with more than any other discipline out there, other than you're right up against power line patrol or those types of things. That there are some very unique disciplines or vocations out there. Our own worst enemy was the fact that they believed that you could serve within a unit. And if you want to become a sergeant, just leave the unit after you have all your credentials, being a helicopter and fixed wing pilot, and go do that for a while, and then perhaps come back. And I said, that's not the right way to look at an investment. This is a long-term investment. So if we get people at 5 years experience, or if we get people at 15 years experience, it's still a long-term investment.
Yeah.
You got to look at those people as being investments.
Yeah. So. That was always tough. The conversation surrounding promotion and having to leave aviation is difficult. We've got a lot of talented people in aviation. Most aviation programs, in my opinion, are probably the top 1% achievers within their respective agency. So to not promote them because they're going to be shipped out is a difficult decision. But you look at, we talked about leadership development and recognizing those traits in folks. How do we foster the development of leadership, but not reward them with those promotions? It's really a question that's difficult to answer, because sometimes I feel like aviation and the rank structure of law enforcement is like trying to fit the square peg in the round hole. We just sometimes don't fit, and there's no perfect answer, because every agency has a different way of promoting their folks based on all the requirements of HR and everything else.
You brought up Brian Smith. When he went from Seminole County to be the chief pilot over at Pinellas County, they have a pay structure that allows them to pay the whatever you call that position more. So if you're fortunate enough to have a pay structure that, let's say, a pilot might be, if they've been there for a while, might be at like a sergeant's pay, and the chief pilot might be a lieutenant's pay. At his agency, they decided not to call it chief pilot, but it's a technical sergeant. Now, he didn't take a test. He's not a sergeant. Like if he got moved back to the road, he's not going to be a sergeant there, but it's a positional rank that makes you the leader and keeps you from having to go back to patrol. So there are creative ways around it, but they've got to be brought up by someone. Someone has to suggest this way, whether it's for pay or position, to keep those folks, so you're not sending them back and wasting all of that experience and that investment.
I think that kind of comes full circle to your initial point. You got to be willing to fight for your folks. You've got to be the supervisor that recognizes that this person's on the verge. We're about to lose this person for this reason. Let me figure out a way to retain them, but also reward them for their benefit.
I don't want to insult anyone on the ground, but I found that in aviation that these guys are highly motivated, highly intelligent, studying for private, commercial, instrument, CFI exams. They have no problem studying for promotional exams. So I think there's probably a disproportionate number of aviation guys who promote and then are forced to promote out. It almost needs to be looked at differently, like you're saying. These guys are just, exams don't frighten them. They're gonna dive right in.
Yeah.
So I think that happens as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know myself personally, I didn't want to test. Actually, I think I did test from corporal to detective one time. I did well on the test, and I had to call downtown. I think I remember talking to you, Eric, about this. I had to call downtown and say, can you please remove my name from the list, because I don't want to promote, because I don't want to get removed from aviation. And I think, again, when it comes to, you don't want to punish your folks for doing a good job, So I think it's great when you have a leader who's looking for ways to reward their folks for their decision to do the job well. For you, what was your experience with your agency, and what's your kind of advice and opinion on this?
Thanks to our sponsor, Dallas Avionics, who provides innovative products to law enforcement, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, military, air medical, search and rescue, and special missions operations. Dallas Avionics distributes OEM equipment, including communications equipment, digital audio systems, PA systems, flight tracking, and other mission-critical devices. Visit DallasAvionics.com for more details.
So for me, I had a unique position in my agency is that I actually promoted and stayed within a unit. So I had a supervisor that was retiring. My partner and I were both wondering who's going to be our next sergeant. So I told him, I said, well, we've got to put ourselves forward. We have to study and get promoted because either we're going to be that asshole that's a supervisor or we're going to work for an asshole. I'd rather be the guy that's there. It's a supervisor. But we both studied hard and we both got promoted. And he got transferred out because I had more time in the agency than he did. So I got to stay. I remained at that rank so I wouldn't be removed from aviation. And then on the backside of that, when I retired, at this point, Mark Conklin, who promoted to lieutenant, was now the only person that had the supervisory capabilities coming back and fill my shoes as a sergeant. So I said, well, you have to find a way to get him or make a lieutenant position in aviation because he's the only guy that can do it. And you're going to have to find a way to do that. But it's, you know, having that mental fortitude when you sit in before your promotional exams and they ask you, what is leadership courage? You know, you've got to be able to look them in the eye and tell them exactly what they want, what you need to tell them, not what they want to hear. Mm-hmm. We had a deputy chief one day that wanted us to do a real bonehead thing and have kids up in like a cycle of rides. It was a youth academy. And I said, no. I told him no many weeks ahead of time. I said, no. Well, the day the event came, everything went fine. And I got called back to headquarters and said, you come back over to headquarters. I said, well me or do you want us both? We'll bring the helicopter. I said, well, for what? Well, we got to give these kids rides. I said, no, we're not doing that. I told you already no. So I had to explain to the deputy chief, who was an academy classmate of mine. I was fortunate towards the end of my career. I was the top 3 people in seniority in my department, so I didn't really fear anybody. I said, listen, it's my job as a leader to keep you out of jail, out of the papers, and out of visiting someone in the hospital. So we're not going to take these kids for rides. None of my people are going to. You can call around to the other, and I'm calling Lieutenant Conklin Patrol. He said, what did he say? We're not going to do that. So as a leader, you have to have the ability to stand up to those people above you and say, no, we're not doing that. We had the same uniqueness. We worked in the DC area with a lot of 3-letter agencies. And when budgets got tight one year and they were thinking, I kept hearing, hey, they're thinking of aviation, they're thinking they might want to cut aviation. Every time you do something good for somebody, they want to say, well, how can we help you? How can we help you? I said, not yet. There will come that time. And it came that year. I said, listen, now's the time. They're talking about cutting aviation. I'm not sure how deep, but now's the time. If we've helped you out, NSA, FBI, Postal Service, if we've helped you out, now's the time to get those letters written to our elected officials and tell them how much we helped you out. And they forced me to take half a budget that year. You had to live with, can you live with half a budget? What's that mean? Half fuel, half maintenance. When's that start? July. Okay, sure. So I just loaded up on my maintenance, bought as much as I could ahead of time, lived within that budget for 1 year. That very next budget, I asked for another $500,000 and got it. So it's a matter of being credible as a leader, but also not being afraid to stand up and hold the line and say, no, we are not doing this. And it doesn't matter how much you push me to do it because you have more rank than I do. I'm not going to do it. My folks aren't going to do it either.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge. Being able to say no to someone in a position higher than you is vital. And I think even going back to the TFO selection, I think that's a really critical skill to look for in somebody. I don't know if skill is the right term for it, but look for somebody who will say no. Because at some point, a watch commander is going to call you. Somebody of higher rank is going to call the hangar and ask you to do something that's unsafe. I think in the selection process, we should look for folks that are willing to say no.
Right. And they don't want to hear it. The bosses, I mean, we've had how many times have we called on the East Coast helicopter shopping where we would say, no, we can't fly for that mission because of a weather-related issue. Well, they'd go and call the next agency, neighboring agency, and I'd call them and say, no, we're not going to do that. If your aviation unit said, we are not going to fly due to weather, or for what, if as long as it's not maintenance for weather, you can't call them because if you do, they come over here, they have an incident, now we're responsible. Yeah. You wouldn't call a homicide unit from a neighboring jurisdiction if your homicide unit said no, or a canine unit if didn't meet their criteria. So we're in our region, we were very good about calling the hangar. Hey, what's going on? We just got called by these guys for this missing person. What's going on? We declined that call. It's a bullshit call. Okay, well then we're not going to decline the call also. So you have to have even just from your leaders, but across other leaders as well.
Something else you said that I think is really cool and really important is developing folks within your jurisdiction, whether it's county, city, federal, state, whatever the structure you work within, working with those folks to where if something does happen, like you said, you've got a line of folks out the decision maker's door saying, no, this program's vital to my department for these reasons. You know, and I think law enforcement we're guilty of only wanting to do law enforcement missions. It's easy to just to go out and go 10-8 and do the job that we're so accustomed to doing. And again, sorry, Eric, but you did a really good job of including
Ding dong.
including economic development, the fire department, engineering and planning, you know, segments within the city and departments within the city that aren't typically relying on aviation. But when you do that, you're not just a police asset anymore. And when it comes time to, I don't want to say this, but cash in a favor, as that's what we want to call it, you've got these, you know, 5 department heads that are saying, no, we need them. And this is why. So
even internally, I made sure when we had an operation to do, it was 2009, we're doing an NVG program for the aircraft, having the entire aircraft overhauled. And I kept getting a lot of pushback from purchasing procurement, and the people that we would knock heads with worse with procurement people. We'd put a project forward, no, decline. So finally I had a meeting with her and said, well, tell me what I need. If you called me to fly you want me to bring 2 pilots or a pilot and an observer, you want me to have fuel and a camera, I'm expecting the same courtesy. I need you to tell me what I need to do. I know that I want to sole source this product because it's a great product. It's not your job just to make me go off on my own and try and figure it out. It's your job to tell me what I should or shouldn't do, because we do have a responsibility to the citizens, the taxpayers. But rather than you being adversarial with me, let's work on this together. And we did. And then also what a lot of folks think about is pulling their risk management in. Risk management in my agency was a valuable source, because when we would have issues about them wanting to cut training, let's go call risk management and see what they think about it. They're the ones that overall that insure us or have insurance. And they became our biggest fan when we went from, we're trading in an aircraft. We flew a joint regional venture with Howard County, Maryland, and they were shutting their unit down. Their aircraft was being sold. We were going down to one aircraft and buying a new aircraft. So then the question was, do we keep and buy the new one? Do we keep both? And ultimately decided to get rid of one. But our risk manager was pushing the whole time. She says, listen, I've saved you $10 million this past month. We can afford to keep that or to buy another new aircraft. So having those people in your wheelhouse is good as well, because you have people that are going to fight for you, even internally, that are very close to the county executive. Sometimes, in our case, we had a county executive, like a mayor. He wasn't even hearing what was going on. We had to get to that. But it's a matter of building those relationships over the course of time.
Yeah, I love that. You talk about operating within the state structure. You have a unique experience of operating in the state of California, which, you know, there's a lot of opinions that go with the state of California. It's definitely not an easy state to navigate as far as bureaucracy goes. Can you talk about your opinion and kind of how that worked out for you?
Sure. In my first day at aviation, so I had done some administrative time, and I had a captain that was really advocating for me to go to the aviation unit. And I had already, like I mentioned before, I'd already had my EMT license, little EMT experience, but I had it as the base for paramedic school. And so I show up and he says, let's go grab a cup of Joe. You know, CHP, coffee has priority. That's what it stands for. And so
coffee has priority. I haven't heard that. That's actually pretty good.
So we went across to Skid Mark's Cafe. The first words out of the supervisor's mouth kind of took me off guard. I wasn't anticipating what he was going to say. I thought he was going to say, welcome to the unit. And he was, the first words out, well, you weren't our first choice.
Wow.
And I'm like, all right, so this is going to be a hill to climb.
Welcome to the family.
And so, exactly. And so, you know, not something you'd expect from leadership, you know, a supervisor and then so on. But it was something that I kind of made it my challenge to prove them wrong for making that decision, or for having that designed idea in their mind, or whatever it was, that barrier. It was my job to break that. And I did, over time, developing relationships within the unit and establishing myself as kind of a leader. And then going to headquarters in Sacramento, really as a leader for all the TFOs and to be their voice. You know, in the highway patrol structure, the TFO gets a 5% pay raise and a pilot 17%. So there's quite a disparity between the two. And as a paramedic, I was one of 34 paramedics in the state for the Highway Patrol. Every 2 years, I have to go do my ACLS, my PHTLS, all my medic certificates, same as a pilot, but I don't get that much pay. It was $50 a month to be a paramedic.
Right.
So after taxes, you're taking home $32.
Maybe a couple coffees, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. That's skid marks, yeah. So it was black coffee. So, just to develop the relationship with your supervisors, and then, like it's been said on the panel before, is just having those advocates up higher, and then, that constant revolving door, assistant commissioner for a ride and doing an auto with him so that he actually, made his stomach come up to his throat to actually feel what it was like to fly in a helicopter. And then all of a sudden we're buying news things, and so it does, as Eric said too, just developing those relationships. I worked in this big cubicle prison in Sacramento. There's sworn and non-sworn at headquarters, and being able to walk down to purchasing and say, hey, we want to do this. How do we do this? And give them a challenge coin or something, and make them feel a part of your journey. Show them a video, like a GoPro video from your helmet, and say, yeah, we just this pitch and hoist yesterday, and we rescued these people. We were up at Mount Whitney, we landed, and, all these things. And you bring them on the journey with you, and you got to make them feel like they're vested and have that contribution as part of the growth of the unit.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think sometimes we learn as much from people about leadership that aren't doing a good job as are doing a good job. Yeah. You learn what you don't want to do or don't like about that kind of leadership style versus the ones that you do. And I think you picked up on that.
And it's uncomfortable. It's not making that popular decision. Like Shannon was saying, we did external loads. So human external cargo, both short haul and hoisting. And when I took over the position, our policy hadn't been updated since 1998. And everybody turns to the Highway Patrol for, hey, can we get a copy of your policy? You guys are doing it. And, knock on wood, nothing happened. But, it was time to change. It was finding out what we didn't know. And so I brought in an outside company to audit our program. And that was going to make or break me. I was either going to be a hero or I was going to be a villain. And ultimately, first day of training, all the cops are sitting in the front row with arms crossed, and they're like, yeah, what are you going to teach me, boss? And eventually, after day 2, everybody's coming around and we're talking and we're learning, and it becomes this whole learning experience together and growing, and rewrote policy. And I left it to somebody else to pick it up and take the torch.
Yeah.
From a leadership standpoint, I can look back and go, I left it a little bit better than I found it, and the next person's going to do the same.
Right.
Yeah. You brought up something that earlier, talking about bringing somebody along to kind of witness what you're doing. And you talked on it as well, Brian. I remember doing the same thing as well. We were implementing our area use of force program. And I think there's a little bit of reluctance on the buy-in, at least from my perspective, on the program until we brought our then captain of the program up and suited him up and, with some training, showed him the use of force, aerial use of force program firsthand. He actually did it. And I think once he did it, he recognized the value in the program and what we were actually trying to do. So I think what you guys are saying is dead on. Once people see firsthand what you're doing and can kind of buy into it because they now see it and don't just conceptualize it in their brain, it changes things. So I love that you guys are doing that. Anything to touch on it, Eric, as it pertains to that? Because you were involved there as well.
You have to really take yourself out of that position and say, hey, if I'm trying to explain this to somebody, I can't just assume that they're going to get it the way I get it. The examples of taking people up for a flight or bringing people up to show them the program, it goes a long way because we have a tendency to want to just be like, well, why do I need to do that? And it's because to this person, it's a world apart. It's something they can't even fathom in their wildest imagination. And so the simple act of bringing them into your circle and expanding that circle to include them can make a huge difference and create exponentially greater dividends for you and the unit.
Yeah. I love the topic of leadership. One question I think lasted probably over an hour between the 7 of us. And I knew that would happen. And I want that to happen because the natural conversation parts that go with that are important. And I want to kind of change gears a little bit and talk about technology. We talked about how important it is for folks to see what we're doing. We talked about how using downlink technology can help folks see how important it is we're doing and look at the return on investment. And obviously downlink is your guys' wheelhouse. You guys are providing that real-time intelligence, actionable intelligence that folks on the ground can use to change the outcome of a situation for the positive. So on technology, I'll read a question to you guys. And it's interesting when it comes to technology, I feel like whether it's the recent upgrades in technology as it pertains to avionics or mission equipment, all of these recent upgrades in technology have improved our ability, effectiveness in so many ways. It's been awesome. I guess what's the most recent technological advancement that's made law enforcement units in aviation more effective?
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thanks to our sponsor, Dallas Avionics, who provides innovative products to law enforcement, the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, military, air medical, search and rescue, and special missions operations. Dallas Avionics distributes OEM equipment, including communications equipment, digital audio systems, PA systems, flight tracking, and other mission-critical devices. Visit DallasAvionics.com for more details. Thank you to our sponsor, CNC Technologies. CNC Technologies, serving law enforcement, government, and military markets with tailored mission solutions, system training, and live 24/7 support with CNC.live platform. Explore more at CNCTechnologies.com. Thank you to our sponsor, Collins Aerospace Goodrich. Whether your mission is saving lives or servicing high-value assets, Collins Aerospace's Goodrich hoists stay ready to assist. Features such as single-point payout reduce the potential for hoist-induced load swings, enhancing overall safety.
Thank you to our sponsors who make these conversations possible. To close out these episodes, we wanted to do something a little different. We included some blooper outtakes from the in-person recording with the CNC team at the famous Lumar restaurant in Beverly Hills. Enjoy.
Will you turn your mic a little bit?
There we go.
Start again.
That's how you do that. I always wondered.
I got a 4-year degree in that class. Speaking of technology.
I knew you for a long time.
Don't threaten me.
You were my customer. You were my customer.
Yeah.
Is that his way of saying he's senior to us?
Way senior.
What's our time right now?
We're at 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Holy cow.
You guys need to shut up.
So, you're drunk, aren't you?
No. So that's what's on the ceiling.
Time to close up the hangar. Thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS.